The rain came in thin sheets, barely rain at all, more like the air had grown tired of being dry. It settled over Willow Creek the way it always did in early April, without announcement, without drama, just a slow dampening of everything until the maple trees along Birch Road turned the color of old bronze, and the dirt lane leading to the Mitchell property smelled of cold earth and something older than memory. Darius Mitchell was at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when he heard tires on gravel. He didn't look up. Delivery drivers came twice a week. The school bus didn't run on Saturdays. He set the mug on the drying rack and dried his hands on a dish towel that had the word Times home-stitched into it in faded yellow thread. Aaliyah had made it in 4th grade and he had used it every day since. He was still holding it when he opened the front door. She was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, trench coat the color of winter cream, the collar turned up against the mist. Her dark brown hair was pinned back except for 2 strands that the rain had freed. She held no umbrella, she had no briefcase, no bags, nothing in her hands except her own stillness. "Claire," he said, not a question, not a welcome, just her name. The way you'd say the name of a town you drove through once and never stopped in. Claire Whitmore looked up at him. 20 years had changed her face. The way weather changes stone, not destroyed, just more itself. The sharpness around her jaw, the steadiness of her eyes. She was 41 now, probably. He didn't actually know when her birthday fell anymore. "You promised me a house by the river, Darius," she said. Her voice was level, unhurried. "Does that promise still stand?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned one shoulder against the door frame and looked at her standing in his rain-wet driveway as though she'd been there all along, and he'd simply failed to notice. "Come up on the porch," he said. "I'm not inviting you in." She came up the steps. He pulled 2 of the wooden chairs apart and sat in one. She sat in the other without removing her coat. They looked out at the gravel lane and the wet field beyond and the dark line of spruce trees at the property's edge. The rain moved between them like a third presence. "You look well," she said. "You didn't come here to tell me that." He waited. "Hello, Savon. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Langford Development," she said. "We've been in acquisition discussions for properties along the Silverwood River corridor for the past 14 months. Your land is part of the planning zone." Darius turned his head to look at her directly for the first time. He met her gaze without flinching. As a black single dad in his late 30s, he'd learned how often people mistook quiet for weakness, how often they watched for him to blink first. "So, that's what it is," he said. "That's part of what it is. What's the other part?" She looked back toward the tree line. "I don't know yet," she said. He didn't respond to that. He folded his hands in his lap and listened to the rain on the porch roof. That particular sound, like a slow exhale. He had lived in this house for 11 years. He had built the rear addition himself with help from his father Thomas and 2 neighbors who owed him favors. He had driven every nail on the east-facing wall. He had installed the kitchen window himself, incorrectly the first time and correctly the second, and Aaliyah had stood beside him, eating a peanut butter sandwich and offering commentary both times. "How big is the project?" he asked. "I'll say $220 million, Claire said. "Mixed resort development, riverfront access, sustainable building certification, a hospitality component. It's a significant proposal, and my land, your land, is in the center of the planned corridor." He nodded slowly. "Then I think you know why you came here." "Yes," she said, "and it wasn't to see me." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't say that." You didn't say it wasn't either." The rain thickened slightly and then eased. A robin landed on the porch railing, looked at them both with frank indifference, and flew away. "I'll think about the project," Darius said. "I won't give you an answer today. I'm not asking for one today." "Good." He stood. I have to start dinner." She stood as well. "Does Aaliyah still live with you?" He paused with one hand on the doorframe. He turned around slowly. You know her name," he said. "Your father mentioned her years ago. I kept in touch with Thomas for a while." He didn't say anything to that. "She would be 12 now," Claire said. 11, he said. "Her birthday is in June." Claire nodded and walked down the steps back into the rain that was now barely a mist. He watched her go to a dark gray sedan parked half in the lane. Not the kind of car a CEO drove, a rental probably. She opened the driver's door and paused. "I'm staying at the Millbrook Inn," she said, "in case you want to reach me." He went inside and closed the door and stood in the hallway without moving for a long time. From the living room, Aaliyah called, "Dad." "It's 20 minutes, he said. He hung the dish towel on its hook and went to the kitchen and began to peel potatoes. She came back the following Tuesday with a document binder and a rolled survey map tucked under one arm. And this time she knocked with 3 even knocks and waited. Aaliyah opened the door. Darius was in the back of the house when he heard the voices, his daughter's, then a woman's he recognized, and he set down the cabinet hinge he'd been fitting and walked to the front. Aaliyah was holding the door open. She'd pulled her thick, dark curls up into a lopsided puff and was wearing paint-stained overalls over a white thermal shirt. She was looking at Claire with the direct, unsentimental assessment that children use on strangers before adults teach them to be polite instead. "You're the lady from the other day," Aaliyah said. "Dad said you came in the rain." "I did," Claire said. "I'm Claire. What's your name?" "Aaliyah Mitchell." She stepped back. "You can come in. Dad's in the kitchen." Darius was already in the hallway. He nodded at Claire. "Give me a minute." He washed his hands at the kitchen sink, dried them, and came out to where Claire had set her binder on the dining table. Aaliyah had pulled a stool to the table's edge and was already looking at the survey map that Claire had unrolled and waited at the corners with a salt shaker and a coffee mug. "Is this the river?" Aaliyah asked, tracing the blue line with one finger. "That's the Silverwood River," Claire said. "This whole corridor," she drew a wide arc, "is what we're looking at for the development zone. And our house is here." Aaliyah pointed to a small rectangular outline near the bend in the river. "That's right." Aaliyah studied the map. "You want to build a resort?" "That's the proposal, yes." "What kind?" Claire glanced at Darius. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. She spread a set of architectural concept sheets from the binder, river-facing accommodations, a wellness component, a public access trail along the water. Aaliyah turned one of the concept sheets sideways, then upright again. "Your proportions are off here," she said, pointing to the main lodge rendering. "The north wing is too heavy. It'll shadow the whole eastern axis in the afternoon." Claire looked at the sheet, then at the girl. "Aaliyah designs things," Darius said from the doorway. "I do the houses," Aaliyah said matter-of-factly. "I've got 17 plans. Most of them are wrong, but the last 4 are pretty good." She looked at Claire with steady brown eyes. "I could show you if you want to stay for dinner." "She could," Darius said, "or she could tell us what the offer is." Claire closed the concept binder. "The company is prepared to make a fair market offer plus a 20% premium for cooperation based on current assessments that puts your property at close to $500,000. The room was quiet. Aaliyah looked at her father. Darius looked at the map. "The river house," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "That's included in the zone. The entire parcel is..." He pulled out a chair and sat down. Aaliyah slid off her stool and came to stand beside him, her shoulder touching his arm. He didn't look at her, but his dark brown hand moved to rest briefly on her shoulder and then dropped to the table. Outside, the rain had started again, that same thin, persistent rain. It ran down the kitchen window in crooked paths. "My grandfather built this house," Darius said. "My father grew up here. I grew up here." "I know," Claire said. "Then you know that number doesn't mean the same thing to me as it does to a balance sheet." "I do know that." He looked up at her. Something moved through his expression that wasn't anger and wasn't grief. Something older than either. "Did you know about this project before you came back?" he asked. "Or did coming back lead to it?" She held his gaze. "Both," she said. Aaliyah was watching them both with the focused attention of someone who has learned to read a room faster than most adults she knows. "Stay for dinner," Aaliyah said again. Her voice was even, not inviting, instructing. Darius looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he said, "All right, stay." After dinner, Aaliyah spread her drawings across the cleared table. They were done in pencil on graph paper, each one labeled in her small, precise handwriting. Elevation, floor plan, notes. She had a system. Each design got a number, a season, and a word. Design 14 was labeled times winter threshold. Design 17 was times spring return asterisk. Claire looked at them for a long time without speaking. "That one's the best," Aaliyah said, pointing to design 16. "The windows are wrong in the others. The light comes from the wrong direction. What's right about the light here? It follows you, Aaliyah said. In the morning, it's in the kitchen. By noon, it's in the main room. By afternoon, it's in the back where you'd want to rest. A house should follow where you are. Claire looked at the girl. Where did you learn that? Books, Aaliyah said, and watching. Watching what? How people move in rooms, how they avoid certain corners, how they always end up in the same spot. Darius was washing dishes at the sink. He didn't turn around. Claire looked back at the drawing. Your east wall here, if you extended the overhang by 2 feet, you'd protect the window from afternoon glare without losing the summer light. Aaliyah took the drawing and made a note in the margin. Like this, a little more, there. Claire put her finger on the paper. That's where it should break. Aaliyah wrote the measurement. Then, without looking up, she said, Did you leave my dad? The kitchen was very quiet. The faucet ran. Yes, Claire said. I was frightened. Aaliyah looked up. Of what? Of staying in one place, Claire said. Of what it meant to stay. I was 21, and I thought the world was something I had to go and take. She paused. But by the time I understood that, 20 years had passed. Aaliyah considered this for a moment with the seriousness of someone filing information away for later use. He never married anyone else, she said, in case you didn't know. I didn't know. He had me through adoption. When I was 4, he was already living here. Aaliyah looked at her drawing. He said he found me the same year he finished building the river house. He said it was a good year. Claire looked at Darius's back at the sink. His shoulders hadn't moved. The faucet still ran. It sounds like it was, Claire said. Aaliyah picked up her pencil and began revising the overhang with careful strokes. You can come back tomorrow, she said, as though this settled something. I want to show you design 12. The proportions are wrong, but the times IDI is right. Darius turned off the faucet. He dried his hands. He didn't say anything. Claire said, I'll come in the morning. She wore flat boots and a dark jacket and came through the back field the way Darius told her to, along the fence line where the ground was firmer. The morning fog sat low over the meadow, and through it she could see the silver thread of Silverwood River and the shape of something white at the water's edge. She stopped when she saw it. It was a small house, not small as in modest, but small as in times precise. White-painted oak board, with a wide covered porch that faced the river. A stone foundation raised it above the floodline. The windows were large and clean, 2 on each visible side, the kind that let in light generously without apology. The roofline was simple and purposeful. She walked toward it slowly. The porch boards were dry under the overhang, and she stood on them for a moment, looking at the river through the morning mist before she saw the carving. It was cut into the main beam of the porch ceiling above the door in letters that had weathered to the same gray-white as the surrounding wood. Asterisk Aaliyah's River House asterisk. She stood there for a long time. She heard his boots on the wet grass behind her. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and put his hands in his jacket pockets. Every board, he said, I thought of you. She didn't turn around. The river ran somewhere upstream. A heron called once and then was quiet. The fog moved in long, slow rolls over the water. When did you build it? She asked. Started when Aaliyah was 6, finished when she was 8. Why call it hers? Because she helped choose the windows. She was 7, and she said the glass had to be big enough to see the whole sky. He paused. She was right. Claire put one hand on the porch railing. The wood was solid under her palm, worn smooth by seasons. You built the thing you promised me, she said. You just built it with her name on it. Someone had to use it, he said. She turned around then. He was standing in the wet grass below the steps with the gray morning all around him. And he looked at her the way you look at something that was yours once and has since become something else. Not lost exactly, but changed into a form you didn't foresee and can't unmake. You could have sold the land years ago, she said, before any of this. Why didn't you? He looked at the beam above her head, at his daughter's name carved into it. Because you told me once this was the spot, he said. You pointed to this exact bend in the river and said asterisk. This is where I'd want to wake up every morning. I was 19 years old and I thought that meant something permanent. He looked at her. I didn't know permanent was just a word you liked. She didn't answer. Come look at the inside, he said. Aaliyah wants you to see the windows. He walked past her and opened the door, and she followed him in. Victor Langford arrived on a Thursday in a black car that was clearly not a rental. He was 54, silver-haired with the kind of build that suggested decades of personal training and a comfort with physical intimidation that he deployed as instinct rather than strategy. He wore a charcoal suit that was slightly too formal for Willow Creek and shook Darius's hand at the front door with the grip of a man who had been told grip communicates authority. "Us, Mr. Mitchell," he said. "I'm Victor Langford. I believe you've met my business partner." "Come in," Darius said. Victor sat at the dining table and opened a slim folder. He spoke without preamble. "I want to make sure we're being direct with each other. The current offer is fair, but given the project timeline, we're prepared to move to $580,000 if we can reach an agreement this week." "That's above market value," Darius said. "What's the hurry?" Victor's expression shifted slightly. "Not much, just a small recalibration of what he'd been presenting. We have an investor meeting in 6 weeks. Having the full corridor committed strengthens our position significantly. And if I don't sell..." Victor set his pen down. "Then we explore other options." He paused to let the weight of time's other options settle. "The state has eminent domain provision for projects of public economic benefit. It's not a path anyone wants, but it exists." Darius looked at the folder. He looked at Victor. He looked at Claire, who was standing in the doorway between the dining room and the hallway with her arms folded. "You're willing to use the state to take this property," Darius said. It wasn't a question. "I'm saying it's a legal mechanism that exists." "I know what it is." The kitchen clock marked the seconds. Aaliyah was at school. Thomas Mitchell was in the back garden. Darius leaned back in his chair. "Both of you should go," he said. Victor looked at Claire. Claire unfolded her arms and stepped forward. "Darius." "I'm not selling this week," he said. "I'm not selling to a threat, and I'd like you both to leave my house." Victor closed the folder with deliberate care and stood. "Think it over, Mr. Mitchell. The offer won't stay on the table indefinitely." "Then it doesn't stay," Darius said. He held the door open. Victor left first down the porch steps to his black car. Claire stopped at the threshold. "I didn't know he was coming today," she said. "Maybe," Darius said. "But he's your partner. His actions are yours." She didn't argue with that. She walked down the steps. He closed the door. From the back garden, Thomas called, "Darius, who was here?" "No one," Darius said. "Come in for coffee." Thomas Mitchell was 73 years old and had the hands of a man who had spent his life working with them. He set his coffee mug on the table and looked at his son with the calm, careful attention of a man who has learned when to speak and when to wait. "She came here because of the land," Darius said. "I know," Thomas said. "You knew about the project?" "I knew she was in development. I didn't know about this project until last month when she called me." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "I should have told you." "You talked to her all this time?" "Not all the time. A few calls over the years. Christmas cards for a while." He looked at the window. "She asked about you. I told her you were well. I told her about Aaliyah." He paused. "I didn't think she'd come back. I thought she was just someone who needed to know you were all right." Darius was quiet. Thomas said, "Did she ever explain it?" "No, she was just gone. 6 months of calls, she didn't answer. Then the number was disconnected." Thomas set his mug down carefully. "Victor Langford," he said. Darius looked at him. "He was working for her father, Robert Whitmore." Thomas's voice was flat and even. "In 2005, Robert Whitmore didn't want his daughter with a 20-year-old black carpenter from Vermont. He had plans for her. Victor handled things for him." He looked at his son. 6 weeks after Claire stopped answering your calls, a check arrived. $25,000. The note said it was from a sympathizer, anonymous." He exhaled slowly. "I sent it back. I never told you because I didn't want you to know someone thought that's what you were worth." The room was very still. "She didn't leave on her own," Darius said. "She may have wanted to leave eventually. I don't know. But the way she left, the silence, that was Victor and Robert Whitmore." Thomas picked up his coffee. "She may not have known what they did." Darius stood and walked to the window. Outside, the apple tree in the yard was beginning to bud, the small, tight green of it against the gray sky. "She said she was frightened," he said, "to stay." "Maybe both things were true," Thomas said. "She was frightened, and she was also pushed." He paused. "That doesn't make it smaller." "No," Darius said. They sat in the kitchen for a long time, the coffee growing cold, the apple tree moving slightly in the wind. the river silent and present in the middle distance beyond the field. "She needs to know about the check," Darius said finally. "Yes," Thomas said, "she does." The emergency board meeting of Whitmore Langford Development was convened on a Monday morning in the 42nd floor conference room of their Boston headquarters with 9 members present and 1 abstention. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, which was gray and still in the early light. Claire stood at the head of the table. She had not slept well. She had taken a red eye back from Burlington and changed at the office, and was now standing with a tablet in her hand, and the kind of composure that is not the absence of feeling, but the decision to set it aside. "I'm calling this meeting," she said, "because information has come to my attention that directly affects this company's conduct and the legitimacy of one of our board members." Victor Langford sat 3 chairs to her right. He had a glass of water in front of him, and his expression was careful. "In 2005, Claire said, an attempt was made to manipulate a personal relationship in my life. That manipulation served both personal and professional interests aligned with this company's predecessor entity." She set the tablet on the table and slid it toward the center. "I have email records from my father's personal archive, provided to me by his estate attorney after his death last year, showing that Victor Langford facilitated a direct payment to Darius Mitchell's family as an inducement to sever contact with me." The room was quiet. "The payment was returned," Claire continued. "The family said nothing for 20 years. The point is not the money. The point is that Victor used his position and access to interfere with my personal life for his own strategic benefit, and he is now the co-architect of a development project that requires the acquisition of that same family's property." She paused. "That is not a coincidence. That is a conflict of interest and a breach of fiduciary duty." Victor leaned forward. "I'd like to speak." "You'll have your turn," said Board Chair Harriet Crane, a 60-year-old woman with silver-frame glasses and the expression of someone who had seen every variety of boardroom theater and was not interested in any of them. Victor set his palms on the table. "What Claire is describing is a decision made 20 years ago by Robert Whitmore, her own father. I executed his instructions. That was my role. To characterize that as a conflict with current business operations is a fundamental misrepresentation." "You sent the check," Claire said, "on Robert Whitmore's behalf with his authorization. Did you disclose that history when we became partners?" Silence. "Did you disclose it when you identified Darius Mitchell's property as a target parcel for this project?" More silence. "Did you raise it when I told you I was going to Willow Creek personally?" Victor's jaw tightened. "The email record shows you identified the Mitchell parcel as central to the corridor 18 months ago," Claire said. 8 months before I knew about it. You shaped the project around it." She picked up the tablet. "That's not coincidence, Victor. That's deliberate." Harriet Crane looked around the table. "We'll take a short recess and then proceed to the vote." The vote was 6-3. Project suspension pending full compliance review. Victor Langford placed on administrative leave. Claire Whitmore authorized to conduct restructuring of the development portfolio. Victor left without speaking. Claire stood at the window after the others filed out. Boston Harbor was still gray and still. Somewhere in Vermont, it was probably raining. She had won. She stood there with that fact and tried to feel it. And what she felt instead was the carved letters above a porch door. Asterisk Aaliyah's River House asterisk. And 20 years of rain that no boardroom vote could return. The hallway outside the conference room was empty. The cleaning staff had not come yet, and the long corridor had the particular silence of a building between purposes. The business of the morning done, the afternoon not yet started. Fluorescent light on cream-colored walls, the faint sound of harbor traffic far below. Claire stood alone in it. She held her tablet and her phone and her jacket folded over one arm. And she stood in the clean, neutral, climate-controlled corridor of her own headquarters and thought, asterisk, I won, asterisk. She thought about what that meant. It meant the project would not proceed in its current form. It meant Victor Langford was gone. It meant that a 25-year-old attempt to purchase someone's grief had been exposed in a room of 9 people, most of whom would file it away as a footnote to an interesting quarterly meeting and return to their lives. It meant that Darius Mitchell's land was safe. It did not mean that 20 years were retrievable. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the corridor's end, she could see Boston in its Monday morning efficiency, the ferries crossing the harbor, the office towers with their glass skins, the highway interchange far below, carrying thousands of people between their lives. She had run one of the larger development companies in New England for 6 years. She had restructured 2 regional portfolios, overseen 14 major projects, been named to a list of influential executives 4 years running. She had an apartment in the Back Bay with high ceilings and good light. She had a driver and an assistant and a standing reservation at a restaurant she liked, and she had stood in a carpenter's kitchen in Vermont, watching his 11-year-old daughter correct the proportions on an architectural rendering, and felt something shift in her chest that no professional accomplishment had ever touched. The ferry moved across the harbor. She put on her jacket and took the elevator down. 2 days later, a shipping confirmation email arrived at Aaliyah Mitchell's school email address, the one she used for her architecture correspondence, which she had set up herself at age 10 with the help of her 4th grade teacher. The package was described as Times Professional Drafting, set grade A, with compass and architectural scale rulers asterisk. The sender was listed as Times C. Whitmore, Boston, MA asterisk. Aaliyah showed the email to Darius at dinner. He read it twice. He set it on the table. "She sent you tools," he said. "Professional ones," Aaliyah said. "Not the student kind." He picked up his fork and continued eating. "Are you going to call her?" Aaliyah asked. "I might." "You said I might." Aaliyah ate her dinner with the patience of someone who had learned that certain things take the time they take. He called at 8:30 after Aaliyah was in bed. He stood on the back porch with his phone, looking at the dark field and the darker tree line and the small, pale shape of the river house in the distance. It rang 3 times. "Darius," she said. "The porch was always yours," he said. A long silence. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say. The other kind, the silence of people who have too much and are deciding where to begin. "Claire," he said. Another silence, different in texture. "I didn't know about it," she said. "I need you to know that." I think I do know it," he said. "But knowing it and feeling what comes after it, those are different timelines." "I understand." "I'm not asking you for anything right now," he said. "I'm just telling you what the porch is." "What is it?" He looked at the chair beside his, the one that had stood empty all the years he had lived here. "It's a chair," he said. "It's been here, that's all." She was quiet for a long moment. "Can I come back?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Come in 3 days. Aaliyah wants to show you Design 12. He heard something in the silence after that. Not quite a laugh, not quite a breath. Something that had been held a very long time being quietly set down. 3 days, she said. "Saturday morning," he said. "Bring coffee. I'll make breakfast." He hung up and stood on the porch in the dark for another few minutes, listening to the river he couldn't see, and the spring peepers in the field that he could, and the small, ordinary sounds of the house behind him where his daughter slept. Then he went inside. She came on a Saturday in a rented sedan, a dark green one this time. She parked on the gravel and walked up the porch steps, carrying 2 paper coffee cups from the bakery in town, and wearing a flannel-lined jacket that she had bought at a shop on Main Street the evening before, the kind of jacket you buy when you have decided to be somewhere for longer than a meeting. Thomas Mitchell opened the front door before she knocked. He was 73 years old and had the steady, unhurried courtesy of a man who has decided that most things in life deserve the same measured greeting. He took one of the coffees without being offered it, tasted it, and nodded once with the approval of someone evaluating workmanship. "Medium roast," he said. "Good." "I asked the girl at the counter," Claire said. "She said Darius comes in every Saturday." "He does." Thomas stepped back from the door. "Come in, he's making eggs." She came inside. The house smelled of toast and coffee and the particular domestic warmth of a Saturday morning that has nowhere urgent to be. Aaliyah was already at the dining table drawing. She had her graph paper spread in a careful grid, and she was working with a new compass, the one from the drafting set, its silver arm moving in a deliberate arc. "Good morning," Aaliyah said without looking up. "Good morning," Claire said. "I've been thinking about Design 12, Aaliyah said. "The problem isn't the proportions. The problem is I put the living room on the wrong side. Come look." Claire set her coffee down and pulled up a chair. Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway, spatula in hand. He looked at Claire sitting beside his daughter at the table, the drafting tools between them. He looked for one moment and then looked away. 5 minutes on the eggs, he said. Take your time, Thomas said, and sat down in the armchair by the window with his coffee and opened the newspaper. Aaliyah showed Claire Design 12. The layout was for a small house, 3 rooms, a covered porch, large south-facing windows. Aaliyah had put the living room on the east side away from the afternoon light. It belongs here, Claire said, pointing to the west half of the plan. I know, Aaliyah said, but I was worried about the kitchen access. You can solve the kitchen access with a half wall instead of a full partition like this. She picked up a pencil, not her own, but Aaliyah's, and she didn't reach for it automatically. She paused and looked at Aaliyah, who pushed the pencil toward her with a brief nod of permission. Claire drew the revision. Aaliyah studied it. She made a note in the margin. Then she said, "You could work from here. You know, there's a good desk in the spare room and the Wi-Fi is fine." Claire looked at the girl. Aaliyah was already looking back at her drawing. "Dad fixed the router last fall," Aaliyah added. "It reaches the porch." From the kitchen came the sound of eggs in a pan, the small, ordinary sound of Saturday morning. From the armchair, Thomas turned the page. Claire looked at the window. The field outside was the pale green of early April, the grass still short and wet, and through it she could see the distant white of the river house and the line of the water beyond, bright and silver in the morning. The rain had stopped in the night. She had checked her calendar that morning. 3 weeks of obligations, a portfolio review, 2 stakeholder presentations, all of it portable, all of it with some rearrangement possible to do from anywhere with a desk and a connection. She had known this for approximately 72 hours and had been pretending not to know it. "I'd need a few weeks," she said. "Okay," Aaliyah said. She turned the graph paper 90 degrees and began working on the revised floor plan with the focus of someone who considers the matter settled. Darius came out with the plates. He set one in front of Aaliyah, one in front of Claire, one at the head of the table where Thomas was already folding his paper. He sat down for a moment. No one spoke. The morning light came through the south window at a low angle and caught the steam rising from the coffee cups. "Design 17, Darius said. He was looking at Aaliyah's spread of papers. "I was going to show her later," Aaliyah said. "Show her now." Aaliyah pulled Design 17 from the bottom of the stack. It was labeled in her small handwriting at the top. Asterisk, spring return, asterisk. It was the best one. Claire could see that immediately. The light fell correctly. The proportions were generous without being wasteful. The porch wrapped the house on 2 sides and opened toward a river that had been drawn in 3 careful blue strokes. "When did you do this one?" Claire asked. "Last week," Aaliyah said. "After you called." Darius was eating his eggs, looking at his plate. "It needs a name," Aaliyah said with the gravity of someone stating a formal requirement. Claire looked at the drawing for a long time. The porch with its double facing, the river in its 3 blue strokes, the windows angled to follow the light through the hours of a day. "After rain, asterisk," she said. Aaliyah wrote it in the margin, "Spring after rain, asterisk." Thomas picked up his coffee. Outside, a robin landed on the porch railing and sat there, looking in at the 4 of them with its customary indifference. The river moved. The chair beside Darius's was no longer empty. It had not been built for storage. It had not been built for the abstract comfort of possibility or for the idea of someone who might someday return. It had been built because good porches have 2 chairs and a house by the river, was promised once to a girl who was frightened and young and had not yet learned that the things you run from have a way of becoming the things you carry. She had carried it 20 years. She had set it down on a Saturday morning in Vermont, between a compass and a pencil and a plate of eggs in a house that smelled of toast and old wood and spring coming in through the window. The rain had stopped. The mist over Silverwood River burned off slowly in the morning sun, revealing the water in its full, unhurried clarity, moving the same way it had always moved, over the same stones toward the same inevitable and patient sea. Darius set his fork down. He looked at Claire. She looked back. No words for it. "There rarely are," for the things that matter most. Just the light in the river and the sound of a child's pencil moving across graph paper, drawing the shape of a house that does not yet exist but already has a name. Asterisk. A promise is not what you say. It is what you build when no one believes you anymore. Asterisk.